command center.
Have you discovered how they plan to stop me?
Not as yet, noble prophet.
Find me what I need to know, or your place on the path is forfeit. Tell me you understand.
Yes, Holy One. It shall be done. Have the drones scour these machines. No. Taken their command center.
Have you discovered how they plan to stop me?
Dibs on the chest plate!
We have taken their command center.
Have you discovered how they plan to stop me?
Taken their command center. Take cover.
Yes, for you! Be pleased! Victory! Grenade thrown!
There will be a great deal of hardship on the road ahead. You will become the best we can make you. This place will become your own. This place will become your tomb.
What happened?
Chief, please respond.
settle down, Marines. Somebody hit the emergency power.
On it, Sergeant.
Think the brutes know where we are?
Anyone from Charlie 2? Got separated.
Nah, man. Alpha 6, they're all gone too. You can walk? Set your boots on the line. Chief's got the right idea. Let's mount up. Get the hell out of these caves. Let me drive.
I'll get the door, sir.
Fire on those bastards! On the double!
still kicking?
Get ready! More of them!
Be careful! Get closer and engage! They're falling back!
They're going down!
Raja expedition. I uncovered these relics and homage to their glory. When the dust settles, you will all see why.
Say again, Recon? Breaking up.
Something in the crater, ma'am. Something beneath the storm.
Say again, Recon? Breaking up.
Something in the crater, ma'am. Something beneath the storm.
Master Chief, finally a good connection. Truth has excavated a Forerunner artifact. Time to get it apart.
Main forces to the town floor, Chief. Survivors meet the next battle.
Lord Hood, we made it.
Music to my ears, Commander. What about the Ark?
Fully uncovered, sir.
And we don't have much time. Marines, the Prophet of Truth doesn't know it yet, but he's about to get kicked right off his throne. You will take our city back and drive our enemy into the grave they've been so happily digging. One final effort is all that remains.
there, and all happily titled. Now, bearing in mind, I do have to investigate perhaps later on formatting, because some of these you can see they're a little bit cut off because they're all to the same format, but if I open them in a new tab, the whole picture is actually there to enjoy. So if you want to build a website for
Greetings. Fairmount is an interesting brand, and one you don't really hear much about. Despite them being a Canadian company, they have hotels all around the world, with the majority of them being historic structures. One of them is the Fairmount Banff Springs, located within the stunning Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada. It's a well-respected property with a ton of history and a pretty iconic structure in the Canadian Rockies. So today, I'm flying out to see what it's like. We're checking in for one night in Fairmount's prestigious gold category, getting the highest level of service with some of the highest prices to accompany it. So, does this experience justify the high price? Well, let's find out. This video has been made possible by NordVPN. Go to nordvpn.com/brightsuntravels to get huge savings on a 2-year plan, plus an additional gift. So I've had a pretty rocky relationship with Fairmount in the past. My most recent stay at one was in 2018 at the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa. I paid somewhere in the high $300 range for a standard room that charged you extra to use the in-room refrigerator, made me miss my flight from their valet service taking much longer than expected, and charged an offensive $9 for an Esca bottle of water. So you can say that Fairmount hasn't exactly been my top choice for stays since. With that said, I've always known about the Fairmount Banff Springs and the Lake Louise hotels. They're stunning properties with over 100 years of rich history. They're also located in Banff, one of the most breathtaking national parks in North America. My good friend and producer John has been harassing me over the past 3 years to go check it out. So I finally caved and booked a flight to do just that. The Fairmount Banff Springs is about an hour and a half away from Calgary's International Airport. Although it doesn't feel like it, as once you reach the mountains, the drive gets a lot more pretty. It continues to do so once you enter the actual town of Banff, and ultimately arrive at the Fairmount, which is a stunning and massive Scottish-inspired castle. It was built in 1888, and is essentially built upon the confluence of two rivers. It was originally built by Canadian Pacific Railway as a structure looking rather different than how it does today. That's because in 1926, the majority of the original structure had burned down, and the present tower was built in the years following. The Banff Springs Hotel, as it was originally called, hosted many dignitaries from King George VI to Queen Elizabeth and a few Canadian prime ministers. It was ultimately designated as a National Historic Site as well as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Canadian Pacific Railway's hotel division was actually still acting as the owner up until 1999, when they had purchased the controlling shares in the Fairmount brand, to which they had decided to rebrand this property as a Fairmount. Today we booked a standard 1 king bed Fairmount Gold Room. I'll talk more about the pricing at the end of the video, but from what I've seen online prior to our visit, I really wasn't expecting much, and certainly not an ultra luxurious room. However, to my genuine surprise, Fairmount has really stepped up their product. This is due to a $30 million renovation to the main tower in 2021. Which has spruced up all of the guest accommodations as well as a few public spaces. This was desperately needed, as the former rooms were simply nowhere near what Fairmount was charging for them. But things have changed for the better, and our standard gold room was exceptional. While it's on the small side, likely due to the age of the structure, this room was exactly what should be expected for an accommodation at this price point. It has beautiful and tasteful touches of luxury, tons of ports, including USB-C, as well as a stocked coffee bar, and a free-to-use fridge. Oh my god, they did it. The bathroom is also pretty small, but aesthetically is very modern with good finishes. Not the best I've ever seen in a luxury hotel, but totally acceptable. The only annoyance was the bathroom door, which is a sliding door that doesn't exactly close all the way. Now, the other rooms at the hotel range from similarly sized standard rooms with slightly downgraded decor to one-bedroom corner suites to the massive tower suites, located at the very top of the structure inside the peaks. But honestly, our small room was near perfect for one reason alone, and that's the astonishing view. Looking south down the mountain range was absolutely incredible to wake up to. Now, the gold accommodations at this hotel occupy the entire 4th and 5th floor of the main tower. But what do you get with gold other than just a nicer room? Well, on the 5th floor, there's a private concierge just for you to answer all of your questions and fulfill any bookings. Further on are 2 lounges, the first being a quiet one to read, and the other where you'll find the buffet, open during the day and into the night, serving breakfast and evening hors d'oeuvres. You can also find some premium drink offerings from teas, coffee, a build-your-own hot chocolate, fresh juices, and even smoothies. This was already a really solid and luxurious offering, but the spreads they put out for breakfast and dinner were genuinely fantastic. Breakfast featured a ton of options from delicious smoked salmon to a huge selection of hot items. I'm pretty sure the evening hors d'oeuvres were not meant to be eaten as a full dinner, but the amount of genuinely delicious selections they had literally turned into one for us. They had great options from pasta and meatballs to a full charcuterie spread to polenta fries and spinach dip. It was all by far the best lounge food I have ever had. Honestly, it was some of the best buffet food I've ever had, and it really made this something to remember. Unfortunately though, alcoholic drinks were an extra charge, which I would have expected to be complimentary given the price point. But if you are willing to pay for drinks and looking for a wider selection, the newly renovated Rundle Bar provides a very luxurious space to enjoy a wide selection of pricey drinks. But the views are great, and it even has a secret speakeasy style entrance to a quiet seating area. Elsewhere is the Ramsey House, with a nice lounge below, as well as the Walt House pub, both featuring pool tables. As for dining, well, the Fairmount has a few selections. Other than the pub food at Walt House, there's Castello Italiana, the Vermilion Room, and 1888 Chop House, all of which are very expensive. Like, an 8-ounce filet mignon at the Chop House is $70. And while some of these restaurants are very beautifully designed like the Vermilion Room, I'm not sure if a $70 steak in here is all that worth it. Even the quick service option down at the lobby, while nice and looks like it has tasty food, was very expensive. Like, these very simple sandwiches were $16, $17, and like $20, which is absolutely insane. Now, with that said, the reviews for all of the dining have for the most part been overwhelmingly positive. But when you're not at the bars and the restaurants, there's plenty to do elsewhere. The resort offers basically every experience you can think of in Banff, from helicopter rides to private group tours and so much more. The summer activities list is even more extensive, with horseback riding, fishing, whitewater rafting, ATV tours, and a ton of other stuff. But pretty much all of those are at an extra charge, and with some like the helicopter ride and private tours costing hundreds of dollars just for the experience. That's really neat and all, but what I care about is what's free. Or, well, included with your daily resort fee. Surprisingly, there's a decent amount. Regardless of what type of room you get at the hotel, your resort fee covers some equipment rentals, access to the indoor and outdoor pool along with fitness center, as well as a free pass for local transportation, giving you free transportation to the local highlights including the White Museum, which you also get a complimentary pass to. The hotel also hosted a few daily activities like guided nature and history tours and wine tastings. Some require registration and others do require payment, such as the campfire rentals, which is a shame. But I was surprised to hear that the wine and cheese tasting is in fact complimentary, which is a nice perk. But when you do leave the property, there is still so much to do. The Fairmount is in very close proximity to Bow Falls, which is a short hike down the hill. For a much longer 1.5 kilometer hike, you can walk to the Sulphur Mountain, where you can either bathe in the hot spring at the base, or climb the mountain by foot or gondola. For a short drive away, you can find the Cave and Basin Historical Site, or the close by Mount Norquay for skiing. So obviously there's a lot to do on property, but even more, especially off property. And I guess that's where the value proposition comes into play here. As I'm sure you've guessed, staying at the Fairmount Banff Springs isn't cheap. Our standard gold room for one night was $835 Canadian, which is about $620 USD. While that does include all taxes and resort fees, if you bring a vehicle like we did, it will also be an extra $32 for self-parking or $46 for valet. Now, the resort doesn't really have a base rate, as they go off a variable pricing structure which is constantly fluctuating. But from what I understand, the cheapest time to visit is when we did, over the winter. It's when the property tries to fill vacancy with the convention crowd, while the summer is more primarily focused towards tourists, and is also much more expensive. For just a standard regular room, the cheapest rate I could find is in April at around $450 Canadian, which is a fairly reasonable $330 USD. But that is rock bottom, literally the cheapest day for the entire year. And over the summer, you're not spending anything less than $1,200 a night, just for a standard room. If you want to upgrade to gold, then you're pushing $1,600 a night. Even with the updated decor, rich history, and excellent service, I really don't know if you could ever justify that price. But I guess it all comes down to what you care about most. If you want to experience the actual location of Banff and see all of the sights, or if you're into skiing and don't care all that much about the most luxurious place to rest your head, then there are a lot of other choices in the area. Some, like the Moose Hotel and the Mount Royal Hotel, are arguably in better locations and at their highest rates over the summer are pretty much the lowest rates at the Fairmount over the winter. It's also worth noting that the hotel does run several discounted rates throughout the year, and is also a part of the Accor Hotel Alliance. Now, Accor Hotel Alliance is kind of useless to North Americans, since the majority of their hotels are overseas. But that does mean there are a few ways to book this on points, and just generally find other ways to save. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole, so look into it if it interests you. But really, even if you don't stay here, just drop by for a visit to see the castle and walk the grounds. You can still experience the property without spending a night. In the end, I was really pleasantly surprised by the Fairmount Banff. I went into it not with the greatest perception, but was absolutely blown away by the quality of service and how astonishingly beautiful it all was. From what I've seen too, the summer looks even more stunning and vibrant, and really, that's what you're paying for. This is a Canadian icon. It's one of the most famous hotels in Canada and even North America. It's also one of the most breathtaking, from the incredible architecture to the endless mountain vistas that make you feel like you're in a matte painting. It's incredible everywhere you look. And you know what? I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that maintaining a property like this is a costly endeavor and as a result requires the high rates. Fairmount Gold is a step above it all. It was exactly what it needed to be, and while I never think club level is fully worth the premium, I do see a lot of value in it. If you can snag it at a decent price and maybe make it a special occasion or something, I think you'll be totally satisfied. And I think it's genuinely hilarious that this was $465 cheaper than Disney's Contemporary's club level room. Go watch that video if you haven't already. So let's give this an actual rated review. I'll rate the Fairmount out of 5 categories for a potential perfect score of 50 out of 50. Starting with the location, you are situated in an insanely beautiful valley with some very close by attractions. With a free bus fare, you're pretty much connected to everything you need to be in the area, and that gives it a perfect score of 10 out of 10. Amenities are also really solid. You have a few options of ultra fine dining, along with a spa, pool facilities, a bowling alley, tons of shops, and even a convenience store, business center, adventure desk, and winter gear facility. There's certainly a lot, but I do wish a few more experiences were complimentary, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. Luxury and quality is also pretty good. Our room, while small, was very well appointed. There were some areas of the property that didn't necessarily live up to other luxury brands like the Four Seasons, and there are some parts that feel a bit dated and not at the caliber of what you're paying. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Service was phenomenal though. Everyone was super kind and happy, no one made me feel like I was out of place, and all the staff genuinely went above and beyond. I have never had this type of service at any other luxury hotel I've stayed at, and I mean it when I say the staff at the Fairmount were some of the most warm and friendly people I have ever met. I wouldn't ask any more from them. So it's a 10 out of 10. Value, however, is really the most subjective category here. Prices are a bit steep, and even after the renovation, I don't think the rates past $900 a night are worth it. Fairmount Gold was a fun experience, and I maybe would do it again for a special occasion sometime over the winter, but I'm not sure if I could ever justify paying over $1,000 a night for a standard room. It's a 5 out of 10. Giving the Fairmount Banff Springs a very respectable score of 41 out of 50. Remember, you can also view all of my scores in the Google Docs sheet, which a link for it can be found in the description below. You can also check out this video sponsor, NordVPN. For this video, I actually sought out to work with NordVPN for these travel-related videos, since they provide a great and reliable service for me when I'm traveling. They offer a host of pretty good security features, and when you're on the go, or even at home, you can proactively protect yourself from ISPs peering through your data. But what I and so many other people find such enormous value in is getting around geographical-based locks on content. I was recently on a filming trip and wanted to continue watching Downton Abbey in my hotel room every night. I simply chose a Canadian server across their 5,400 plus servers over 59 countries and was quickly and easily watching exactly what I wanted. Or let's say you're outside of the US and want to watch my very own movie Closed for Storm, which is also available on Amazon Prime. With just a few clicks choosing a US server, you're all set. NordVPN has been something I've traveled with for years, and I really can't recommend them.
Oh, so they're laser pointers.
Well, it's been a minute. I've been working on a pretty complex topic, and in the meantime, I need to think of something quick. If only I had more time. That's it! How about a little taste of November in January? Do you have an electrical thing you want to have turn on at a specific time every day and then also turn off at a specific time every day? I know, so do I. But that sounds really hard. I mean, we all know how to make and break electrical connections with a switch. You just gotta touch the metal together and then pull it apart real fast. And we also have these clock things that have an hour hand that slowly turns in a circle twice a day, but you know, some of them only rotate once a day for those that prefer their time served that way. I wonder if we could connect the technology of clocks with switches. Oh look, it's a that! Okay, like a door that's left its frame, that intro was unhinged. I'm sure you've seen these things before. They've been around for a long time. In fact, I'm not even sure how long they've been around. Thanks to that Nintendo thing all the youngins are playing with, internet searches involving the word switch are ruined. Now, I found a time switch from 1921 which automatically turns stairway lights off after 3 minutes. But that's not what I want to talk about here. I want to talk about ordinary timer switches, the kind where you tell it an on and off time and it repeats that daily. I suppose this is a sufficiently obvious idea that it got implemented in one way or another just as soon as we figured out the light bulb. All we really need is a clock that can actuate a switch. In theory, this could be as simple as a rotary switch which gets hit by the hand of an ordinary wind-up clock. When it collides with the switch, it would turn it from off to on and back. To make this a little more flexible, instead of giving that clock hands, we can use a wheel that rotates once per day. Then we could attach little actuators to that wheel that will hit the switch. And there you go! You just made a timer switch! Let's take a look at this consumer-grade timer switch. This intermatic time-all was a staple of American life, or at least some American lives, in the 1970s, probably? I'm having a heck of a time tracking down specific dates for this model's introduction, but it's old enough that it doesn't have a polarized plug, which makes it borderline useless today. But sure enough, it's basically a weird-looking 24-hour clock that has a wheel instead of hands, and hanging around the edges of that wheel are these little movable tabs marked on and off. You can move them by pushing them down, and then they'll slide around the edges of the wheel. Simply put the on time where you want it, then the off time where you want it. Of course, you also need the clock to be set to the right time. You set the time by turning the wheel so that the current time lands where the time of day pointer is pointing. Sticking out the side of the device near that spot is a little black knob that's also marked on and off. That is the actual switch mechanism that the clock activates. And when I turn the dial by hand, I encounter resistance once the tabs get near that knob. Keep turning and you'll see that the knob starts to move. And right when the tab hits the time of day indicator, the knob snaps into the off position. Cleverly, the on tab can only turn the switch from off to on. If the switch is already on, well, the on tab doesn't do anything as it passes the switch. Same goes for the off tab. If the switch is already off, that tab won't do anything. This not only prevents the timer from slipping into the inverse of what you want, but it also means that you can manually flip this to on or off to give a temporary override without screwing up the programming. The timer will resume normal timed operation when the correct tab hits the switch once more. I'll show you how that works in a moment, but I want to point out that since this really is just a clock attached to a switch, that clock could be powered by anything. It could be a wind-up mechanical clock, or a battery-operated clock, or even gravity-driven with chains if you were particularly eccentric. But as this thing's going to get plugged into a wall outlet since that's its whole thing, the clock mechanism is driven by a synchronous motor. That's a special kind of motor that spins in lockstep with the frequency of incoming AC power. Since grid operators do a fine job of making sure that power runs at exactly the right frequency and will even make adjustments day by day to account for accidental drift, it serves as a reliable basis for keeping track of the time. At least, usually. Since the AC line voltage here runs at 60 Hz, that means the motor will spin at 3600 RPM, assuming it's a single pole motor. That's, of course, way too fast, so a ton of gear reduction is used to slow it down to 0.00069, nice, RPM, or 1 RPD, revolutions per day. Anyway, here's where the actual switching and the timing of that comes into play. First, let's talk about the electrical switch that makes this thing useful. In this timer, it's almost hilariously crude. Incoming power from the blades runs right to the terminals of the outgoing receptacle. And whoa, hang on. Those terminals? They've got bumps on them which actually engage with the holes in a plug. Finally, we found something. No surprise, it's old. Anyway, one blade has a simple wire link attaching it directly to incoming power, and the other runs through two formed pieces of brass that touch through a contact right here. The pokey-outy knob of the power switch attaches to a shaft running through the timer body, on the other end of which is a simple rectangular bit of plastic which either pushes the contacts apart or lets them touch. A simple 90-degree turn of that shaft is all that's needed to change switch states. As discussed previously on this channel, electrical switches should have a snap action to prevent arcing from damaging the contacts. Here, that's accomplished with a simple arrangement of two pieces of metal which act like leaf springs. They surround a square cross-section of the switch shaft, keeping a slight amount of pressure on it and holding it in place. As the shaft is turned, the corners of the square start to distend the leaf springs by an increasing amount, thus increasing the force required to turn the switch. But once the square is just past the 45-degree mark into a turn, the springs will now help turn the switch, and it quickly snaps into the next position. This design relies on the timer's plastic shell to hold the top half of the spring in place, as well as to put pressure right on this spot of the brass link to make the contacts actually touch. So then, here's how the automatic switching happens. There's more going on with those sliding tabs than you can see from above. As the dial turns with the passage of time, the on and off tabs slowly approach the switch knob. The off tab has a protrusion that will collide with this wing on the switch shaft. Time marches on though, so the tab will slowly rotate the switch. And once it's pushed far enough, the switch snaps into the next position, opening the switch contact. Notice that there are only two wings on the shaft. Now that it's in the off position, the off tab on the timer's wheel can no longer change the timer's state. The wings are parallel to the wheel, and at this point, are useless. Further into the timer, though, we find another pair of wings on the switch shaft, a pair in the opposite orientation as the first. The timer's on tab has a protrusion just like the off tab, but it's positioned inward so it can only collide with this second wing. Once it does, of course, it pushes the wing forward, turning the shaft, and eventually it clicks over into the on state. This staggered arrangement is how the manual override can work without screwing up the timer settings. The on tab can only ever turn the timer on, and the off tab can only ever turn the timer off. If it's already in the same state as the tab would turn it to, the tab has nothing to grab hold of. This design also allows you to pull the switch knob out slightly, which takes those tabs entirely out of alignment with the switch, thus turning this into a manually operated switch until you push the knob back in. A nice feature, I suppose. While this design works, and works well, it's also somewhat limited. You can only pick a single on and off time, and the shortest duration you can have between them is 2.5 hours. To alleviate these limitations, eventually Intermatic would change this design from sliding tabs to removable tabs. This timer here is one such example. The overall method of operation is remarkably similar to the first timer. We have a rotary switch, though now it's up here, and the on and off tabs simply push that switch into the next position when they collide with it. The green tab turns it on, and the red tab turns it off. The two tabs have their switch actuator pokey bits at different depths, so just as before, the on tab can only turn it on, and vice versa. The similarities don't stop there though. Internally, we have a remarkably similar motor and gear reduction drive, and the switch itself is still quite crude. It's also damaged on this one because somebody decided they should hide a screw underneath the clock dial, and I didn't figure that out until after I went ham with a screwdriver and pliers. Anyway, this time they've refined the switch by making the switch blades double as the springs, which provide that nice snap action. But otherwise, it's still just as crude. Are these wires even soldered to the motor leads? Oh, but this time they did at least take care to switch the hot leg. In the old timer, if you installed it upright on the most common outlet orientation you'll find here, the switch broke the neutral. Very good. I mean, it wasn't polarized anyway, but still. Anyway, since you actually remove and replace these tabs on this design to set the on and off times, you can add more if you want a more complex program. When new, these timers came with 2 or maybe 3 pairs of tabs. But tabs are very easy to lose, and unfortunately Intermatic didn't think of designing some sort of tab holder into this to store them. You'd think this might be for that purpose, but nope, they don't fit there. So those extra tabs tended to disappear. Don't worry, they sell replacements. Actually, as a matter of fact, you can still buy this timer new, though stock appears to be dwindling. Also, you can indeed put the tabs right next to each other and the timer will work. So if you want something to be on for just a half hour, well, now you can do just that. Luckily, at some point somebody asked, why are we faffing with those tabs, and designed a timer like this one. Now, the face of the timer has 48 individual tabs along its perimeter, which can be up or down. Annoyingly, these things almost never bother with printing up is off, down is on, so it's always a game of trial and error setting one up. But once you figure it out, you've got all the flexibility this design could ever offer, and without the risk of losing the tabs, since they're now permanently attached to the timer. Internally, we still have a synchronous motor and gear reduction, making the dial rotate once per day by way of this drive gear. But now we have an off-the-shelf micro switch doing the switching with micro flare. A simple lever connects the switch's actuator to the perimeter of the dial. In this design, the dial acts as a very slowly turning cam, which that lever rides against. When the tabs are in the down position, they push on that lever, which depresses the switch actuator, allowing power to flow. However, when they're in the up position, they leave space for the lever to fall into, and that releases the switch, opening the contact. Microswitches have their own internal spring mechanism to make the switch action happen quickly. You can hear it clicking when I depress it manually. And since it always wants to push that actuator out, the switch will in effect turn itself off as soon as the lever falls into the cam thanks to a pulled up tab. This design also allows for a simple slider to provide a program override. Slide this over and now the switch is pressed in regardless of the tab situation. However, it won't automatically resume the program like the Intermatic timers will. It will only return to the program when you switch it back to timed operation. Now, in case you haven't realized, it's 2023. These days, we have more sophisticated ways of timing when things can and cannot get power. But mechanical timers like these still have their applications. I whip out a few during Christmas time for some indoor lighting displays. And it can be nice to set up, say, a floor lamp on a timer like this to give you some light when you get back from a day out and about. It may be basic, but it's still automation. And in the commercial realm, you still see similar timers used for things like defrost cycles in refrigeration equipment, lighting signage so it goes out after closing time, or even just exterior lighting in general. Though photocells are usually a better option since the sun does that thing where the days get longer and shorter. But as electronicals get cheaper and cheaper, well, now it's just as likely that when you need a basic timer, you'll be getting something like this. A microcontroller hooked up to a display, some buttons, and a relay makes for a very flexible timer. Want different programs for weekdays and weekends? Knock yourself out. Concerned about the time drifting with a power outage? Well, just stick a little rechargeable cell on the board and use a clock crystal as your time base. You can even get inexpensive timers which, after telling them where you are on the planet and the date, will automatically adjust sunrise and sunset times throughout the year, all without needing Wi-Fi or an app. And that's pretty neat. Still though, I can't help but admire the charm that is a clock which turns a switch. Or, I guess, presses a button in some cases. Take two basic things, smush them together, and you can make a pretty handy new third thing. Do it well enough, and you can even change the world. Thanks to Mike for sending these timers my way back when, and of course, thanks for watching. I've been working on a pretty complex topic. That's it! How about a taste of Little November? I mean, we all know how to make and break electrical connect. I suppose this is a sufficiently obvious idea that it got I could have made that work. I suppose this is a sufficiently obvious idea that it got implemented in one way or another just as soon as we figured out the light bulb. Why is the pacing so wrong? As we roll further into this decade, we will undoubtedly accelerate our collective endeavor to stop constantly working to extract gross, sticky goops and explodey gases out of the ground, spend more effort purifying and refining that gunk into products that we then promptly set on fire just to get a moment's work out of before we're forced to do it all over again. Because, you know, we set fire to it. It's gone now. Luckily, we have this amazingly flexible electric infrastructure out there, which, while today does still do a fair bit of burning stuff to keep the lights on, is doing that less and less. We have these technologies that you build one time and then they make electrical energy for decades just because they exist. And yeah, they're trickier to manage, which is a problem we're actively working on. But every passing year breaks a new record for renewables generation, and that's pretty neat. And wouldn't you know it, most things we do today which involve setting fire to something have an electric alternative, including everything you do in your home. The catch, because there's always a catch, is that those alternatives take work to deploy. So, in this video, I'd like to discuss what's needed to electrify the typical American home. It may seem like a daunting task, but it doesn't have to be. We have some pretty slick tricks up our sleeves. This video is the first of two parts. Here, we'll mostly be talking about how energy management innovations can sidestep the headache of a service upgrade. In part 2, we'll discuss alternative appliances which can make the switch even easier, and we'll also go over some potential solutions to dealing with power outages in an all-electric home. 3 quick notes before we start. First, I'm going to be focusing on the American home because, you know, me lived there, but the fundamentals are generally the same no matter where you are. Second, I'm not going to go into operating cost comparisons here, as that's a very local consideration. But I will just point out with a hint of snark that in case it has escaped you, the prices of fossil fuel products have gotten pretty dang volatile lately. Meanwhile, electric technologies continue to get cheaper and more efficient. And lastly, in a similar vein, I'm deliberately not talking about the stuff that needs to be done to the power grid. You don't need to write in about that. We all know that's a big challenge ahead of us. But that work is happening as we speak. I'm here simply to talk about the work that needs to happen in your home to make setting fire to stuff just to live your life a thing of the past. And the good news is that, in many ways, it already is. The vast majority of the stuff you use and rely on is electric. From hair dryers to air fryers, curling irons to waffle irons, your refrigerator, deep freeze, that extra fridge you have in the basement, coffee maker, panini maker, microwave oven, toaster oven, your air purifier, your computer, your phone, your internet modem, your TV, your game consoles, lava lamps, video cassette recorders, all that stuff plugs into the wall and gets power that way. They even, get this, they even make cars now that plug in. Something tells me this electricity business is really catching on. In fact, it's caught on so well that entirely electric homes are quite common. They've been the norm for decades in some parts of the country. However, particularly in colder regions, many millions of homes are out there which currently rely on combusting a fuel somewhere inside them to provide heat. You, like me, may very well live in one of those homes. Sometimes the fuel is the scented methane we like to call natural gas, or it could be propane, fuel oil, maybe even wood, or, if you're feeling particularly old school, coal. That is in fact still a thing in some parts. Although homes which burn fuels almost always have access to electricity too, they still very much rely on those fuels to function. And that presents some challenges to completely electrifying those homes. How many challenges, you ask? 4. 4. Seriously, it's just 4. At most. And that's the really good news here. Unless you got something fancy like a gas fireplace or garage heater, maybe a grill, you only have 4 things which might use one of those fuels. And they are your furnace, or boiler if you're of that persuasion, your water heater, your kitchen stove, and lastly, get ready Europeans, here comes another weird American thing, your clothes dryer. Yeah, we do that here. Look, new LG tumble dryer hooked up to a gas line. A very good and normal practice. But that's really it. Your heat source, your water heater, your stove, and your dryer are the only 4 things we have to contend with. And many homes, especially if they use a fuel that's not natural gas, already have the electric version of 1 or 2 of those, maybe even 3. Speaking of 3, dryers, water heaters, and stoves don't vary all that much from home to home, so installing the electric versions of those things is pretty straightforward. The only thing that's going to need much customization is your heat source, and that's not exactly a new reality anyway. So, if there's only 4 things to tackle at most, why is this difficult at all? Well, those 4 things all need a lot of electrical power to operate, significantly more than can be provided by a standard household outlet. But that's no problem, right? Everybody's got access to 240 volts in their electrical panels, so just run new wires and Bob's your uncle. Well, sure, that's something that's going to need to happen, if we assume conventional appliances, stay tuned for part 2, but the lack of the appropriate circuits going to those appliances isn't the only problem. There's also one of capacity. That's the real showstopper here. Many homes that lean on gas appliances to do the heavy lifting don't have enough electrical power available to make all those electric things work. Except, they do. Almost always. Conventional wisdom says they don't, but conventional doesn't always mean correct. But first, one last side note. I promise this is the last one. I should address here, if you haven't already gathered, that so far I've been talking about single-family homes, and, well, that'll continue to be the case as we go on. Multifamily buildings will face many of the same challenges for electrification, but there are just so many different ways that they can be set up. For instance, lots of apartment buildings have big central boilers that distribute heated water to radiators, but others have fairly conventional furnaces with central air conditioning in each unit, and others still have packaged air conditioners which already provide electric heat. And that's before we get into water heating, which may or may not be centralized. Setting aside all that wonkiness, retrofitting those buildings is outside the responsibility of tenants or a collective responsibility in the case of condo ownership. So, while I'd like to talk beyond single-family detached housing, other situations are just way too complicated to get into. Your mileage will vary, see store for details. Let's get back to the capacity problem. Alright, so generally, a home built here will have either 100 amp or 200 amp electrical service. Those aren't the only 2 options available, but they're the most common by far. If you have 200 amp service, you don't even need to be watching this video. Your home can easily be all electric right now, assuming it's not a McMansion. But oodles of homes, even pretty big ones, only have 100 amp service. And this was a perfectly rational choice back in the day. Gas appliances usually need some electricity to operate, but that's just for running blowers, pumps, igniters, and control boards. They get their heat energy from the fuel they burn, so they don't really tax your electrical system at all. When all your appliances, which could be gas, are gas, the only big electrical demand in your home is air conditioning. And even if you need a real big honker of an AC unit, you'll have at least 50 or 60 amps left for your lights and whatnot. And that's more than plenty. However, electric appliances like heaters, stoves, and dryers have to convert electricity into heat, and that takes a lot of power. To give you some sense of their power needs, a conventional electric water heater pulls 18 to 24 amps when it runs. A clothes dryer pulls pretty much the same when you're using it. And a 3-ton air conditioner, when it's running, well, there's another 20 amps right there. Just those 3 devices pull perhaps 65 amps, and a conventional electric range can pull up to 50 amps. Switch that guy on for dinner, and now we're at 115 amps, which is too much. We'll trip the main breaker every time we make dinner. So I guess we have no choice but to arrange for an expensive and disruptive electrical service upgrade. But hold on a minute. Did you catch the little qualifiers I kept sneaking in there? When it runs, when you're using it, and up to. 100 amp electrical service still allows you to pull up to 24 kilowatts from the grid. And that's a lot of power, way more than you almost ever use. On average, US households consume 1.2 kilowatts, which is only 5% of that. Now, obviously, that's an average. Over the course of a day, power consumption goes up and down depending on what you're doing at any specific time. But that is the key. Time. We've got lots of it to play around with. Most of the time, our homes are just sipping power from the grid. Heck, if you're away from home on a mild day without the need for heat or air conditioning, assuming you didn't leave any lights on, the only electrical loads are your fridge and internet modem. And those are tiny. Even if we add up all the vampire loads from your smart whatevers, we'll drop maybe 2 amps, unless the fridge happens to be in a defrost, then maybe it's more like 5, at least until it's done. Anyway, the point is, we only draw large amounts of power when we're actively doing stuff. Even heating and cooling, which is the largest energy expense of most homes, isn't a constant load. Extreme weather might make an HVAC system work really hard on rare occasions, but even when that's happening, we can work around it. The only practical limitation of 100 amp service is that you can't run every high power load in your home at the same time. That might sound like a bummer, but I promise that you never actually need to do that. Now, before you start thinking I'm going to give you a big flow chart on how to manage your energy use manually, rest assured that's not where I'm going. But think about this for a bit. How often do you actually use your dryer? Probably on laundry day for a few hours, right? The vast majority of the time, that's not an electrical load you have to consider. How about a water heater? Well, it will actively run when you're using hot water and for a bit afterwards to recharge the tank, but once the tank is back up to temp, it hardly runs at all. All right, and now let's consider a standard electric range, which by the way just means combined cooktop and oven. While one of those can pull 50 amps, it'll only do that if the oven is on and all of the cooktop burners are on too, and at full power. So in other words, it never pulls 50 amps, except for maybe a few seconds on Thanksgiving. Most of the time it pulls essentially nothing, but even if you're cooking a complex meal and using all the cooktop burners, most will be running at reduced power or cycling on and off. Same with the oven element once it's preheated. And so more realistically, it pulls perhaps 25 amps. And again, that's only when you're using it. So obviously, if you're just a little careful about what you do and when, you could have all the electric things without going through a service upgrade. You just got to make sure all those big loads don't come on at the same time. Heck, you can even throw high-power electric car charging into this mix, so long as you make sure that the car can't charge when other stuff's going on. This might sound tricky to manage, but what if I told you that smart circuit breaker panels are now a thing? You might very well do what I did and go like this. What? No, stop it. It's the silliest thing I've ever heard. This IoT stuff is really getting out of hand. What could you pop? Oh. Oh! Right now, your breaker box has one job: safely distribute power throughout your home. The main breaker keeps you from overloading the wires going into your house, and the other circuit breakers keep you from pulling too much power on the individual circuits they protect. Some might even offer arc fault protection and ground fault protection too, but that's it. It won't disable power to any circuits for any reason other than a fault, and then you gotta have Jimmy go reset it. But what if it could selectively disable power to high draw loads when required and reconnect them later? Since all the power in your home goes through this thing, it could easily monitor which circuits are active and how much they are pulling. With some pretty simple programming, you could have such a breaker panel divvy up those 100 amps across devices, keeping you from ever exceeding the limit, and all while prioritizing active circuits so you don't even realize that's happening. Span is one company offering smart load centers. That's the technical term for a breaker panel. They're not paying me to talk about them. I was connected to them via a fan of the channel. But I did have a conversation to discuss the details of their product so I could better understand what it does and how people use it. At its core, it's a breaker box like any other. In fact, it even uses standard circuit breakers, which remain the protective devices and allow for manual circuit isolation. But behind each circuit lies an additional switching device that the panel can control. Plus, it monitors power at the individual circuit level, allowing you to determine exactly how much power is being drawn and where it's going. Right now, Span's main customers are folks interested in things like solar energy and battery storage integration who want to be able to track and optimize their energy production and use with the data the panel can provide. So, in other words, nerds. I say that with affection, of course, because that very much includes me. That's very cool. But part of that optimization is identifying low priority circuits so that they can be disabled in times of energy scarcity. That can extend your runtime when operating on stored energy and thus lower the amount of storage you need in the first place. But not everyone is a well-off energy nerd who can afford solar panels, batteries, inverters, and all that jazz. Most of us rely on the plain old grid. And what excites me most about Span and products like it is that they can eliminate the expense of a service upgrade and bring complete electrification to far more people with far less work. Now, I know not everyone will love the idea of smartifying your breaker box, but before you dismiss it, let me illustrate the potential. Say you've got conventional electric everything. Let's even throw a 30 amp car charger in the garage, but you've only got 100 amp service. Conventional wisdom says this is a terrible idea and you'll be tripping the main breaker constantly. But if you assign priority levels to each of those high draw appliances, a smart panel can prevent lower priority devices from running when others are in use and eliminate that problem. Let's say you arrange it like this. Your HVAC system always takes priority. Next is your stove, then your dryer, then your water heater, and finally your car charger. That would be my recommendation, I think. With the panel constantly monitoring the total draw on your system, a hypothetical cold winter evening might look like this. Your heat pump is running hard, and combined with all the other low power draws in your home, you're drawing 40 amps from the grid. You start making dinner, and switching on the oven plus a burner on the stove brings that up to 60 amps. At this point, since another large load like the microwave, water heater, or even just another cooktop burner might appear, your panel preemptively disables the car charger. You probably weren't even charging the car anyway, but we don't want a surprise 30 amps showing up right now. So now, let's say someone else in your home decides to start laundry while you're cooking. Adding the dryer to the mix while cooking a meal with the heat running pushes you up to 80 amps. And at this point, your panel takes further action, temporarily disabling the water heater, which, by the way, is a perfect load to kill, as even if it stays off for several hours, the water in the tank will stay piping hot and you can still use it as you please. It's literally a battery, just a hot and wet one. Once you're done cooking, the panel recognizes the load from the stove has dropped off, so it re-enables the water heater, recharging that wet-hot battery if needed. The car charger remains locked out though, as the higher priority dryer is still in use and the heat is still running. Once the laundry's done though, your car is free to charge again. I hope you see the potential here. This hypothetical home would have been at risk of tripping the main breaker, which is never fun, but disabling lower priority loads prevented that from happening. Your breaker box can be more than just an energy distribution device. It can be a command center too. And all throughout this scenario, it could be sending alerts to you to inform you of what exactly it's doing. Plus, with deeper integration with appliances, we don't even need to go all or nothing. As a matter of fact, SPAN offers an intelligent EVSE, or car charger, that can offer charging speeds as high as 48 amps when possible, and dynamically lower output when other demands in your home increase. So maybe you can't charge quite so fast when you're cooking dinner, but you can still be charging. There's still a lot more potential here though. SPAN and products like it are connected to the internet, though real quick, they don't necessarily have to be. I know plenty of folks will scoff at that, and I brought this up in my conversation with SPAN. I'm leery of it being online myself. I expect we'll eventually see some sort of local configuration option, which is set and forget. Details TBD. However, remote monitoring can be quite useful. For instance, it could tell you something is wrong with your heat while you're away. And with the proper incentives and permissions, a smart panel could also be an important strategy in so-called virtual power plants, which allow utilities to manage and balance power needs by, say, commanding water heaters to switch on when there's excess power on the grid, or reduce demand in power emergencies in a more delicate fashion than just shut entire neighborhoods off. But that's largely future stuff, and may I remind you before you write in with your dystopian hot takes, remember, I said with proper permissions. I hear you and understand you, but let's be reasonable. Working together has some benefits, you know. Now, energy managing load centers like SPAN are creating something of a new frontier. Electricians might look at you like you have 3 heads if you say, I want to install one of these so I can get electric everything with 100 amp service. And that's understandable. Electric codes dictate that load calculations be done to determine the minimum service level for a home based on what's in it. And old calculations will generally not result in 100 amps being okay for an all-electric home. But the good news is that the code is adapting to these new load side management solutions. It may take some time for knowledge of the solutions to spread to permitting offices, utilities, and other regulatory bodies though, so that's something to keep in mind. And hopefully I'm helping. Also something to be aware of is that if you're looking to make any of the changes we've discussed so far, there may be incentives to do so. That might be in the form of a rebate or a tax incentive, and that'll vary depending on where you are and what else you might be doing. You'll definitely want to consult with someone who knows those particulars, and for the record, that is not me. But I don't want you to leave money on the table. And finally, let's now get into the weeds of that tricky thing that is building heat. Dryers, water heaters, and stoves can all easily be managed and installed as they're just single objects without too much variation from home to home and climate to climate. But what heats your home can be any number of things and also depends on the size, age, and condition of your home. And let me start with that. I've said it before in other videos, but a key thing we need to be doing is building envelope upgrades to reduce the need for heating and cooling energy in the first place. More insulation and better windows and doors will go hand in hand with building electrification, as the less heating and cooling you need, the easier it is. Luckily, some incentives are starting to roll out, which you should look into if they'll be helpful for you. But for the purposes of this video, we'll assume your home is already reasonably well insulated. Now, there is one thing I know for sure, and that is that what you're going to need to efficiently heat your home with electricity is a heat pump. With one of those bad boys, you can spend 3 kilowatts of power running the pump and get 9 or even 12 kilowatts of heat energy out of it. They're the closest thing we have to free energy, and that's why they're cool as beans. Check out this video of mine if you want to know how exactly they work. But what precisely getting a heat pump will look like depends a lot on what currently heats your home. If you have a forced air furnace, you're probably in an ideal situation, especially if you currently have central air conditioning, because that means you already have a heat pump. It might only pump one way, because why spend the $50 on a reversing valve when gas is cheap? But you've got a 240 volt circuit already going to the outdoor condensing unit. That's a huge leg up, and there's tons of housing here in the US set up precisely this way. That's good. Even gooder is that cold climate air source heat pumps continue to get better at operating in frigid temperatures. Heat pumps that work effectively below -10 Fahrenheit are just around the corner from domestic manufacturers, and already here from Asian manufacturers, but nobody saw the likes of Carrier or Lennox and might hurt their feelings. Anyway, once those are commonly available, the same circuit that currently runs your air conditioning can also run your heat. It may need to be bumped up in size depending on your specific situation and heating needs, though. The more daunting challenge for electrification is how to manage resistive backup heat. When it gets so extremely cold that a heat pump can't work effectively, or even just to provide backup in the case of a mechanical issue, good old-fashioned heating elements will step in. That could be as simple as some space heaters strategically placed around your home, but most people appreciate a more permanent option. In a home with ducted forced air heating, so-called heat strips in the air handler can switch on when needed, turning that air handler into a giant hairdryer. There's just two problems. First, well, there's another circuit you'll need to run. Your furnace has graduated and needs more juice. And second, it might need a lot of juice. In a large home, the heat strips might suck down 20 kilowatts. That's 83 amps right there, in one thing. However, and I cannot stress this enough, heat strips are rarely needed when you have a heat pump. Already, in many climates, they're basically only there to aid in defrosting the heat pump and to provide a backup in case the heat pump fails. In fact, many thermostats will refer to heat strips as emergency heat. And if you live somewhere it hardly ever dips below freezing, you can probably just skip them altogether. So the heat strips are not something we should expect to operate frequently, and as heat pumps develop and get better at working in extreme cold, they'll become less and less necessary. Resistive backup heat is just that, a backup. Keep that in mind as we continue this discussion. Of course, we still need to plan for having that backup, but hot take, 20 kilowatts of heat strips is probably rarely necessary, especially if we do insulation retrofits like we absolutely should. As a piece of anecdata, my mom and dad live in a pretty large 4-bedroom ranch-style home that's about 15 years old. Including the finished basement, they have 3,500 square feet of conditioned space, a decent chunk. And their house is all electric. But for some silly reason, they don't have a heat pump. They have entirely resistive heat, and what they call the furnace is really an extremely cheap air handler with a contactor for its blower motor and 2 beefy contactors for the heat strips. The thing's hilarious. It has no logic circuitry in it at all. The thermostat is the only control mechanism, and when it calls for heat, there's a big thunk, and then the lights get a bit dimmer, and it delights me in its crudeness. Anyway, the heat strips in their air handler are indeed of the 20 kilowatt flavor. See, there's 2 10 kilowatt doodads in there. But even when it's extremely cold outside, their home has no trouble at all staying warm. Over this past Christmas, it was stupid cold and pretty windy, and on December 23rd, it never even broke 0 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Yet, even keeping the interior a comfortable 68 degrees, the thermostat only called for heat for 15 hours. Yes, that's a lot, but clearly they've got a huge margin for error. They'd be completely fine and still have some margin left with only 15 kilowatts of heat strips. And as it turns out, that's exactly what they have. Each 10 kilowatt heat strip unit is actually made of 2 5 kilowatt heating elements. And one of them happens to be burnt out, meaning they really only have 15 kilowatts, and that's been the case for who knows how long. But wait, there's less! Those heat strips are constantly cycling on and off thanks to a limit switch whenever the heat's running. I don't know if that's normal behavior or if their blower speed is set too low or something, but each one is only on about 2/3 of the time. So in reality, their home only has 2/3 of 3/4 of 20 kilowatts, or 10 kilowatts of heat output. And that 10 kilowatts was only needed for 15 of 24 hours on an extremely cold day. Yeah, their home is fairly new and well insulated, but it's also no passive house. They've got old-fashioned double-hung windows everywhere, and other than some extra attic insulation, the house is basically just built to the code minimums of the day. Yet we know exactly how much heat output it actually needs to stay warm in the coldest weather we get, and it's nowhere near 20 kilowatts. It's actually more like 6 or 8 tops. By the way, this sort of data logging is a really valuable thing smart thermostats provide. You can use it to find out just how oversized your heating system is, which around here, they always seem to be by a factor of 2. But anyway, circling back to the smart breaker panel, even if you truly need some big ol' heat strips for your home, which again, I cannot stress this enough, that should only ever be necessary on rare occasions, well, we can still manage that load so long as we're clever about it. Say we had 15 kilowatts of heat strips, and the smart breaker panel could power limit them in chunks of 5 kilowatts. That would mean that, should you need to, you can throttle the heat output rather than just shut it off entirely. So when other loads like the water heater or stove threaten to push you over 100 amps, we can just knock off 20 amps from the air handler, which will reduce output slightly, but still provide you with heat. And of course, when those other loads disappear, we can send the full amount back to the air handler. We like to pretend 100 amps is not a lot of power, but folks, it really is. We just have to use it wisely. So far, I've been talking about what homes that currently use forced air furnaces and central air conditioning will need to do to electrify themselves. That's a huge amount of housing here, but it's definitely not universal. You might have a boiler which makes water hot and pumps that around to radiators throughout your home, or perhaps an in-floor heating system, and that might also produce domestic hot water for bathing too. There are heat pumps which are designed to replace boilers, but they'll be a bit more work. You'll need to run a new circuit to an outdoor unit, plus new plumbing and whatnot. And if that's the situation you're in, you may want to look into ductless mini splits, which can also provide cooling in the warm months. As far as what you'll do for your backup emergency heat, I'll let you be creative. We're pushing into half-hour territory, but there's still a lot more to talk about. So far, I've discussed what it would take to swap your conventional gas stuff for conventional electric stuff, and how we can use energy management to make that possible with limited electrical supplies. But that's still a lot of work. Thanks to the miracles of heat pumps and batteries, though, we can avoid much of that work. In part 2, I'll talk about heat pump water heaters, clothes dryers, and stoves with batteries. We'll also discuss options for dealing with power outages. There will be a clicky thing popping up right about now, which will take you there once it's ready. But for now, thanks for watching. Just those 3 devices pulled per... But hang on a minute. But hang on. But hold your horses. But hang on, though. Your HVAC system always takes priority. Why am I running out of vocalization before the end of priority? Your HVAC system always takes priority. Why is that happening? Priority. The thing we need to be doing is building envelope upgrades to reduce the need. Should I keep that in? I'll start over.
All had to come together if Karua was going to pull this off. After many weeks of practice, in the summer of 2016, Karua got to work. On July 6th, Karua was on a solid run through World 3. He got great Hammer Brother movements and even got Door 3. The next few worlds were up and down, but he was within striking distance going into World 7, a position he had been in several times over the past few weeks. But the world got off to a good start. Second try 7-1 clip. The next few levels were clean as well, including the shell throw in 7-5. And then, he arrived at 7-7. This just got real. Although he lost some time later in the world, first try 7-7 was enough for a gold split. But there was still World 8. We've seen Karua struggle here before. And sure enough, in 8-1, he lost P-speed to lose a few seconds. But he still closed it out for a 1:10.52. For the first time in over a year, Karua was the 100% record holder. He was officially back. That was the game plan to get his goal. Take a lottery ticket into World 7, pray the ticket hits to get all the clips required, then hold it together in World 8. Karua had 23 seconds to go. This is what he did over the following weeks. By the end of July 2016, Karua had a remarkable improvement, just 5 seconds away from his goal. And finally, he had a run with a clean World 8. He saved 6 seconds in that world alone, which took the run into the 1:10.30s. There was still room to shave a few seconds off. He had lost fire in 4-1 and took a few tries to do the clips in World 7. But overall, it was a really clean run. There just wasn't much time left to save. With 3 world records in July, Karua was flying high. These 2 weeks had been among the most fruitful in his entire speedrunning career. So, he decided to take a short but well-deserved break. He returned in August and started doing more runs, needing just 1 more record to achieve.
くれる Fix these crashes.